Hello, my name's Kelly Close. I work for LRE Water out of Denver, Colorado, and I'll be speaking with you today on the subject of choosing your own adventure, specifically in the context of successful communication for adaptive management. When we talk about being adaptive, we're generally talking about adapting to new data that we've been collecting, and that's what this is really focusing on. How do we do that in a way that meets our variety of audiences where they're at? Really, we're just talking about a process that iterates and adjusts as time goes by. You're not just one and done. So in the real world, for a simple field monitoring project, adaptive management might look like this. Now, in the real world, for a watershed project, things get a little more complicated, partly because it's just larger geography, of course, but you're also going to have more people involved. And the technology that you need to use to collect information is going to be more varied, probably more advanced. So that's what we're talking about here, is how do we communicate this information? In fact, I'm going to modify my title just a little bit. Communicate for data-driven adaptive management. We're collecting so much data. How do we use it to communicate to more than just the people that collected the data? So who's involved? Who are we talking about? Who are we trying to successfully communicate with? We've got our data scientists, and that's who I think we're doing a pretty good job with technology and web tools and all the stuff that kids are coming out of college knowing how to do. I think we got this. Environmental regulators, I think we're okay there because those are very clear mandated, at least when there's a regulation in place. We know what we need to provide, and maybe we jump outside the technology scheme for that and we just use reports and PDFs, but we're doing okay. We've got watershed managers. Now this is where things start getting harder because these folks are oftentimes left kind of out of the loop of the real-time collection and learn about things after the fact. Engaged citizens. Now this is a more and more important one as time goes by because these engaged citizens oftentimes may also be regulators or scientists or managers of their own right. They've got their skills, but boy, you don't know what their abilities are to ingest the information you're trying to provide. So what do these folks need? And unfortunately, this is my attempt at a Venn diagram to make the illustration that there is no Venn diagram. Really, these folks all need very different things out of this data-driven process. So where do we start? And without building 4 different tools, without sinking tons of resources into a lot of different approaches. So oftentimes this is really where it starts, in the database. You're probably beyond spreadsheets at this point if we're talking about minute collected data like this picture shows. But you got some qualified database guru in there, and they're going to take this cryptic data and they're going to turn it into readable data, and voila, you've got data. But it's still just spreadsheet data, right? And this isn't very usable by a very large audience. We're still in the data scientist category, and the folks doing the analysis, we're not communicating yet. Now here we're starting to communicate. This is a typical graph that might be produced in Colorado to meet a very specific type of regulatory mandate, and a lot of folks look at this and know exactly what they're seeing, but this has a pretty limited audience, right? There aren't a lot of folks who are going to look at this graph and understand what they're seeing. So this is still just one way of communicating data, and most likely it's going to go into a report. And we end up with a static result here that's immediately out of date and is not reflecting the dynamic nature of our adaptive management process. So what do we do? We've got to get the data out there somehow. We're getting it out there in printed reports. We also are getting it out there in data portals. We're getting pretty good at this too. The data portals, the web portals, web analytics, so much. But again, these things lack the context. If you know what you're looking at, these things are hugely useful. But there's so much of it. And again, the context needed for some of those end users is just not there. And there's lots of ways to interact with the data on those portals that's getting more and more common. And again, these are necessary ways of communicating that information to the end users. but somehow there needs to be a match between the open-endedness, all those choices, and the usability, something that helps guide the users to what it is they need, leveraging the skills that they have to get there on their own. And that's exactly what I mean by choose your own adventure. We've got some tools that I want to demonstrate for you that I think are doing a pretty good job of letting those end users choose their own adventure. And that's really who's doing the choosing here. We're trying to give the ability to the engaged citizens, the watershed managers, the regulators, and the data scientists so that they can go to these tools and immediately start honing in on what they need. And it's there for them. They can find it, they understand how to use it, they can get it. And it's one tool, so we didn't have to expend resources for providing different avenues of communicating the information to these different groups. So this first tool is called the Eagle County Watershed tool. It's being used by Eagle County in Colorado, and it really focuses on bringing up-to-date water quality and stream flow information to users in a way that they can really understand what it means in terms of is it good, is it bad. And it does this by displaying dots on a map that represent locations and results and colors those dots. So a color scheme that is kind of intuitive. This is above something that matters. This is well below something that matters. And in the process of doing this, it brings in locally specific benchmarks, thresholds, comparisons, water quality standards, and displays those amongst the data so that users can really understand. So these standards are being matched up with both the parameters and the locations in this tool, and giving users a very intuitive way to access that information. So this is a recorded video of the tool in use. The user is clicking around and exploring the land use cover layer and also getting into the parameters. And one of the real key pieces of this is there's lots of water quality data behind this. So users can go in and find different parameters that they're interested in based on a group, based on categories, turn things on and off to really filter it down so they're not looking at so much all at once. And then once they do click in, they can see the results intuitively, again, colored by high or low based on a comparison that means something. And get to the time series data, looking at it point by point or aggregated. So there's a lot of different ways people can look at the information. And then also the stream flow component that I mentioned. In addition to water quality, there's also USGS-based stream flow data that when the user clicks into that, they immediately see it compared to statistics. High year of record, low year of record versus current. And so they understand right away what they're looking at. What does it mean? You can not only apply these filters, turn map layers on and off, pick the parameters that you're interested in, but then you can save that. So the next time you come back to this tool, it looks the way you need it to look, and you don't have to drill through all of these layers every single time and get back to what you were looking at. Here you see them saving a saving a scenario. So this user has now saved this. Next time they come back to the tool, they can load that same scenario and it'll put them back where they were. And they don't have to filter through all those layers. And then over there on the right, there's you get your own customized layer control box that's just got the layers in it that you said you wanted to see. So you can just kind of get all that other stuff out of your way, which I think that's key in creating these choose your own adventure tools, because like I said before, we don't want to create 4 different tools. We really hope to be able to deliver one repository of information that different users can use to meet their individual needs. So the second tool I want to demonstrate for you, this one is also in Colorado. The Denver Metro Water Quality Assessment tool it's got a little different spin than the last one. It's also trying to give users a way to get at water quality data, but it's doing a lot more in the contextual information provided, the words, that stuff that we oftentimes end up resorting to reports to provide because we need to put all the words around it. This tool is doing that right there in the tool itself. So there are these things called storylines that users who maybe they're not even ready to look at the data, but they can click in and read these storylines and understand more about the water quality parameter, why it's being measured, who's measuring it, why it matters, what maybe they can do to help. So here's a video of a user interacting with this tool. Clicking into the storylines, we've got a number of different focused storylines. This project started with E. coli because that was one of the highest priority parameters that was being studied in this watershed, and they've added more over time, and there will be more water quality parameters added next year with this storyline information. And then users can also click into a map and start looking at the data that has been collected as part of this effort. Again, with some intuitive display, big dots mean lots of data, cool colors mean lower values, stuff like that. But then these graphs give you this hoverability. You click in and actually see the information about that point that was collected, who collected it, when it was collected, and users can start asking questions about specific parameters, time periods, hopefully supported by that information that we provided in the storylines. Lots of open-endedness to it here. And then in this context, we're really just looking at the data and exploring it and understanding it. But there's also a download section where users can get more than just the summary statistics. It can actually get the tabular information and pull it down. So the third tool I wanted to highlight for you, also out of Colorado, the Cherry Creek Basin Water Quality Portal. This tool is special in that it has been around a long time, and it started out being very focused on just organizing this entity's water quality data in a central repository so that it could then be used more readily by all their consultants, engineers, to execute studies without all that work of reprocessing the data every time. So that was initially the focus, and then they started using it for more and more high-level things, planning-focused things, using it for their technical advisory committees and even their boards to just look at the results. So it started to get more and more visual and more high-level stuff. And then a few years ago, they made the jump to actually producing their annual report online within this tool, and that is what I think really brought it into the true choose-your-own-adventure category, as I would call it, because now we can use this tool to download data, to do other studies. We can look at high-level graphics that tell stories, and as an engaged citizen or a tax-paying citizen, in fact, in this basin, we can come in here and look at the annual report. So again, a video of someone interacting with it. This is the Explore section. So this is kind of that mid-level where you've got access to the data, but it's grouped in ways that give you context to help you understand what you're looking at. It's not just tables and graphs, telling stories kind of functionality. This is an example of a real graphical way of looking at depth profile data, for instance. It's just really easy to understand what you're looking at there. Depth profile data in a reservoir is challenging to communicate and visualize, so I particularly like that one. It's also got some links out to some real heady statistical stuff, so choose your own adventure for those folks who know what that means and love box and whisker plots. But then also bringing it back to just kind of the simpler, I want to get into the data and download something. There is a login component to this site. Most of the site is available without a login, but if you want to download data, you need to log in so that it can save your settings. And then the annual report side. So this jumps up to that kind of higher level. I want to see key takeaways from last year. I want to flip through the report, but the report itself is interactive too. So instead of just looking at a paper report that's immediately out of date, these graphs always reflect the latest and the greatest. Some of them may be tied to the water year that the report's about, but some of them aren't. They continually reflect updated information. So it's a very dynamic way for them to produce these annual reports, and then also they can bring all that contextual information in, explaining what it is that is going on, so they can tell the story at the same time as giving out the data. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope that you reach out to me with questions. If you have any interest in exploring these websites further or understanding how they work under the hood, how they get created, just drop me a line. I look forward to meeting you.